You are now entering Clearview, Illinois. The name of tonight's tale is That Stupid Look on Your Face. Albert was certain the Westerfield building was on Mulberry and Oates. His father had been a janitor there for 20 years, and his mom used to pick him up from that building after scooping him up from school every day. So unless someone moved the building, he must have remembered it wrong. After walking down several of the same streets, he saw it there, exactly where he assumed it should be. He could have sworn he walked past that spot several times. So much so, he noticed the same vagrant on the street doing some sort of street preaching he didn't have time for. Albert hustled to the building because by now he was truly late. The building was grand, but generic. If you had seen any other office building, you had seen this one. He was only 20, so even entering this place sent unwanted chills through his spine, giving him the ungodly thought he could end up like his dad. His father wasn't a bad man, nor was he difficult, unloving, or absent. He was just simple in a way that never led him to ever question the choices in his life. He never strived to be more. He was a janitor, and he was fine with it, and to Albert, that was depressing. He took an elevator to the 13th floor and found himself in front of Alamo Linux's Immaculate Earth Next Solutions. The gender-neutral receptionist looked up with a fake smile that masked the desperation of a mundane existence. "Go right in," they said, even before Albert opened his mouth to speak. They pointed to the office at the end of the hallway, almost with the laissez-faire attitude that he'd been there before. Albert wondered if they had mistaken him for someone else. He did resemble his father a bit. Perhaps that was the explanation. The name on the door at the end of the hall read Isaiah M. Gray. When he knocked softly on the door, it opened. There was an odd man sitting in the Spartan office, seemingly basking in the sun moments before Albert broke his zen. "Albert, my boy, it's so good to see you," said the man with his unusually generic, conventionally handsome face. "Do I know you?" asked Al. "No, but I knew your father." "Oh," Albert said with a long exhale as if that cleared up much of the initial confusion. "So, it's all yours," said the man who Al assumed was Mr. Gray. He perked up, feeling that this was the easiest job interview he had ever gotten. "I got the job?" Albert asked, just to make sure he wasn't mistaken. "Job? Oh no, I'm giving you the company," said Mr. Gray. "What?" "The company, it's yours." Mr. Gray opened a desk drawer and tossed down a key and a key card. He then stood up as if he were leaving. Albert processed the entire exchange by the time Mr. Gray got to the door. "Wait, what are you talking about? What does that even mean? I don't even know what you do." Mr. Gray closed the door, which he was 1 foot out of by this point. "Your father wanted you to have this before he died. And don't worry, I'm sure you'll pick everything up," Mr. Gray said as he exited the room. Albert hopped out of the chair he was in and tried to catch up to Mr. Gray, who seemed in an awful hurry to be somewhere. By the time he got to the door, he could see the gray suit at the end of the hall. "Hey, wait up!" yelled Al. If he heard him, he made no indication. All he could see was the back of his head power walking to the front door. When he tried to get out, the door held fast, and he saw Mr. Gray getting onto the elevator from the hall. He looked to the ambiguously beautiful receptionist. "Unlock the door." "Sure thing, boss," they said as Al heard a mechanical click. By the time the door opened, the elevator closed. Al turned back to the office, which he apparently owned now. "What now?" he said, muttering loudly to himself. Al spent the better part of a day acclimating himself to his surroundings like a timid pet. Asking around the office, he had come to realize that this company had something to do with cleaning up global pollution, though he was very unsure on how, because no one gave him a completely straight answer. He got the impression that even the people who worked there were not 100% certain. The office itself was surrounded by mirrored glass, which gave off the optical illusion their ranks went on through infinity. When he asked around about his father, people had mixed reports. On one hand, people thought of him as the janitor, but some people assumed he was more. though they weren't certain. Seeing Al didn't have a schedule or technically anything to do, he just left when everyone else did. He wasn't sure who was paying him or what he was supposed to do, so he figured his best move was to keep coming in until he figured it out. When he walked out of the office building, the street preacher in front was staring directly in his face and had finally gotten Al's attention in a way he was sucked in. "They're watching you, laughing at you. Don't be a fool, don't let them trick you," said the preacher. As Al walked away, the crier kept on going, yelling his truth to the open air and the sky if no one was there to listen. "They're making a fool of you. Don't let them," he yelled. Al did a little research on the Alamo Linux Company on his own time and found that they were in fact a business since 1868, though what their primary function as a company was changed ever so often. The only thing that was consistent about them was that they stayed in business. Al even troubled his mother for a few questions about this honestly puzzling predicament he found himself in. His mother moved away to Nevada almost a moment after he left the house and retired at age 55, and if she knew anything, she completely fooled him. When he returned the next day, the street preacher was outside the building, speaking almost as if he was just continuing the conversation he had the day before. Al kept an eye on the vagrant, but still didn't take him seriously. When he entered, everyone spoke to him as if he had been in charge for years. He had to admit he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Today had to be the day that they let him in on the joke. When he got to the office, there were lawyers there, getting him to sign legal documents that gave him possession of the company. It was explained to him that it was his father's will to leave the company to him if he ever came to get a job there and follow in his footsteps. Seeing he was a janitor, it felt as if it was just luck he needed a job. He read everything he signed. It was all clearly worded, though he had to admit he was more hoping for the best than truly analyzing it. People started to come to him with their problems, and he solved whatever he could and passed the buck for whatever he couldn't. Towards the end of the day, or his version of the end of the day, new suit-clad men entered the picture. The men beelined to Al with so much focus it scared him. Glancing at the mirrors, their images appeared as if an army of suits rushed him. "Are you Al Jenkins?" one of the interchangeable suits asked in a demanding tone. "I am," Al replied. He handed him a letter and said, "You've been served." Al took the letter into his office, and it was outlining his day in court for his company's crimes against humanity. Human trafficking and drug dealing were first and foremost on the list. This couldn't be true. This obviously was a setup. They couldn't have his name so quickly. He only got the company officially a few hours before. This is what he got for taking any of this in the first place. His father would have been so very disappointed that his heart lusted for greed. He considered clearing out as much money out of the company bank account and fleeing. Why not? He didn't have anything in Clearview worth sticking around for. Al went into his company computer and transferred everything he could to his own bank account. Even though he was sure his bank would let him take out but so much at a time, maybe he could find a way around it. Maybe he had time enough to do it slowly. All the while, he felt snickers on the air as if his conscience was in his ear telling him he was a fool. A fool. When he thought of that word, he recalled the man outside who preached on and on about being made a fool. It probably meant nothing and was a coincidence, but on the other hand, maybe he had seen this happen before and was trying to warn him. When he left the office, he moved slower and more deliberately, too scared to look anyone in the eye, as if they could read him like a book and knew he robbed the company blind. It didn't matter too much because when he had enough money squirreled away, he'd never have to see them again. When he got outside, the vagrant stared into his soul with knowing eyes. "They're making a fool of you. Don't let them. They see you always. Handle it wrong and your life is over." Al listened for half a second, but thought better of it, kicking himself for thinking some barking at the moon loony had any actual insights. "Your father never fell for it," Couldn't get him to fall for it, no way," said the vagrant to Al's back. Al stopped, then instantly spun back around. "Did you say something about my father? Did you know my father?" The homeless man nodded. "A rock, that one. Bedrock. Don't fall for their tricks." "Who is they?" "Aliens," the man said. "Aliens from space?" When the homeless man nodded, he rolled his eyes in annoyance and walked away. There was a deep irony in being made a fool by someone who insisted not to be a fool. He had a few more days to come back to the office so that he could squeeze every drop out of it. At the moment, the only reservations he had was what island he was going to live on when it was all said and done. When Al made it to work the next day, word had got out and everyone asked him if he was okay. He tried to stay as vague as possible and figured there wouldn't be much left to do after he transferred funds to his bank account. When a knock happened, Al nearly rolled out of his seat before straightening himself. "Come in," he said blindly. A man walked in with a literal hat in hand. "Hello, I'm Alvin. I'm sure you don't know me, but I'm your brother." Al laughed out loud. "My brother, my long-lost brother," Al said, unable to restrain his laughter. Al shook his head in disbelief. There was absolutely no way his father would have stepped out on his mom. It was impossible. He could call his father unambitious, even simple, but his sense of morality was beyond reproach. "So, you heard I inherited a company, then you pop up to cash in. Maybe you were hoping you were first so that you could be sitting where I am. Newsflash, buddy, it was a scam. It was all a trick to pawn off the company's debt." "That doesn't matter, brother. I can show you the proof you need so you'll accept the truth," said Alvin. "I don't and I won't," said Al. "I don't want anything. I just want you to know." "Oh, great. Then let me sign over this financial nuclear waste dump to you, brother. My treat. Or you can get the fuck out." "It didn't have to be this way, brother," said Alvin. As Alvin turned, Al noticed for the slightest moment that his eye lingered on a spot over his shoulder. Al slowly turned to see what he could possibly have seen. When he turned to look, he saw nothing but his own reflection in the mirrored glass. "What were you looking at?" Al demanded. Alvin shrugged. "What do you mean?" "You clearly saw something over here. What was it?" Al walked over to the mirrored glass and began tapping it frantically. "Don't do that," Alvin said with such urgency it only goaded Al to do it harder. "Why? What's your stake in it?" Al picked up a chair. "Come on, man," Alvin said in a tone that didn't feel as if it had anything to do with soothing someone out of control, but covering one's ass. Al flung the chair at the glass. The mirror shattered. Al took awkward steps backwards because his sanity was being tested. 3 pale, white-skinned, black, bubble-eyed creatures backed away from the broken wall. They seemed to speak with unnaturally tiny mouths that didn't produce sound. They nervously froze and stared at Al. Al stared at Alvin. Alvin stared back at the creatures. The air was electric. Each party refusing to move first, lest they have to acknowledge the other's existence. The creatures moved first, taking a half step forward, which was all Al needed to flee the building as if it were on fire. Al didn't stop to talk to anyone, for all he knew they were all in on it. He flew down the stairs faster than he thought his feet could move, spending just as much time looking over his shoulder as he did ahead of him. When he passed outside, he saw the same vagrant preaching. "Made a fool of you, did they?" said the homeless preacher. Al reluctantly stopped because it took until just now for the man's words to set in. "What are they?" Al asked. "Assholes, the whole lot of them. What do they want? Is it a test, an experiment? No, not really, not as far as I figured. And why are they doing this?" "I can answer that." The homeless man turned around and reached down. Al thought he was going into a hidden pocket. The vagrant turned around and pulled away his face as if it were a mere rubber mask. There stood a ghost white-faced creature with black bubble eyes. It laughed maniacally, but the sound didn't come out. It pierced right into Al's head. "We do it just to see that stupid look on your face," it said through fits of unrestrained laughter. You are now exiting Clearview, Illinois. I hope you enjoyed the trip.